We bought an old house, my boyfriend and I. He's in charge of the new construction converting the kitchen into the master bedroom, for instance, while I'm on wallpaper removal duty. The previous owner papered every wall and ceiling. Removing it is brutal, but oddly satisfying. The best feeling is getting a long peel, similar to your skin when you are peeling from a sunburn. I don't know about you, but I kinda make a game of peeling, on the hunt for the longest piece before it rips. Under a corner section of paper in every room is a person's name and a date. Curiosity got the best of me one night, when I googled one of the names and discovered the person was a missing person. The missing date matching the date under the wallpaper. The next day I made a list of all the names and dates. Sure enough, each name was for a missing person with dates to match. We notified the police who naturally sent out the crime scene team. I overheard one text say, "Yep, it's human." Human? What's human? Where is material you removed from all the walls? This isn't wallpaper you were removing. I hate it when my brother Charlie has to go away. My parents constantly try to explain me how sick he is. I'm lucky to have a brain where all the chemicals flow properly to their destinations, like undammed rivers. When I complain about how bored I am without a brother to play with, they try to make me feel bad, by pointing out that his boredom likely far surpasses mine, considering his confinement to a dark room in an institution. I always beg for them to give him one last chance. Of course, they did it first. Charlie has been back home several times, each shorter in duration than the last. Every time without fail, it all starts again. The neighborhood cats with gouged out eyes showing up in his toy chest, my dad's razors found dropped on the body slide in the park, across the street, mom's vitamins replaced by beds of dishwasher tablets. My parents are hesitant now, using last chances sparingly. They say his disorder makes him charming, makes it easy for him to fake normalcy, and trick the doctors who cared for him into thinking he's ready for rehabilitation. That I'll just have to put up with my boredom if it means staying safe from him. I hate it when Charlie has to go away. It makes me have to pretend to be good until he's back. He awoke to the huge insect-like creatures looming over in his bed and screamed his lungs out. They left the room and he stayed up all night, shaking and wondering if it had been a dream. The next morning, there was a tap on the door. Gathering his courage, he opened it to see one of them gently place a plate filled with fried breakfast on the floor, then retreat to a safe distance. He accepted the gift. The creatures chittered excitedly. This happened every day for weeks. At first, he was worrying they were fattening him up, but after a greasy breakfast left him clutching his chest from heartburn, they were replaced with fresh fruit. As well as cooking, they poured hot steamy bath for him, even tucked him in when he went to bed. It was bizarre. One night, he awoke to gunshots and screaming. He raced downstairs to find a decapitated burglar being devoured by the insects, but disposed of the remains as best he could. He knew they had just been protecting him. One morning, the creatures wouldn't let him leave the room. He lay down, confused, but trusting as they ushered him back into bed. Hours later, a burning pain spread throughout his body. It felt like his stomach was filled with razor wire. The insects chittered as he spasmed and moaned. It was only when he felt a terrible squirming feeling beneath his skin that he realized the insects hadn't been protecting him. They had been protecting their young. It has been said that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. I understand the sentiment behind the saying, but it's wrong. I entered the building on a bed. I was strapped for cash and didn't buy into the old legends of the hotel to begin with. So $50 was more than enough to get me to do it. It was simple, just reach the top floor, 45th floor, and shine my flashlight from a window. The hotel was old and broken, including the elevator, so that meant hiking up the stairs. So up the stairs I went. As I reached each platform, I noted the old brass plaques displaying the floor numbers. 15, 16, 17, 18. I felt a little tired as I crept higher, but so far, no ghosts, no cannibals, no demons. piece of cake. I can't tell you how happy I was when I entered the last stretch of numbers. I counted them aloud at each platform. 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 44. I stopped and looked back down the stairs. I must have miscounted, so I continued up. 44, one more flight. 44, and then down 10 flights. 44, 15 flights. 44, so it's been for as long as I can remember. So really isn't doing something repeatedly and expecting different results. It's knowing that the results will never ever change. It's realizing you no longer fall asleep. It's not knowing whether you've been running for days or weeks or years. It's when the sobbing slowly turns into laughter. He had been given the watch when he was 10. It was a grey plastic wristwatch in every respect except for the fact it was counting down. That is all of the time you have left in the world, son. Use it wisely, and indeed he did. As the watch ticked away, the boy, now a man, lived life to the fullest. He climbed mountains and swam oceans. He talked and laughed, and lived and loved. The man was never afraid, for he knew exactly how much time he had left. Eventually, the watch began its final countdown. The old man stood looking over everything he had done, everything he had built. 5. He shook hands with his old business partner, the man who had long been his friend. 4. His dog came and licked his hand, earning a pat on the head for its companionship. 3. He hugged his son, knowing that he had been a good father. 2. He kissed his wife on the head. 1. The old man smiled and closed his eyes. Then, nothing happened. The watch beeped once and turned off. The man stood standing there, very much alive. You may think at that moment he would have been overjoyed. Instead, for the first time in his life, the man was scared. Everyone loves the first day of school, right? New year, new classes, new friend. It's a day full of potential and hope, before all the depression of reality show up to ruin all the fun. I like the first day of school for a different reason though. You see, I have a sort of power. When I look at people, I can sense a sort of aura around them. One outline is based on how long that person has to live. Most everyone I meet around my age is surrounded by a solid green hue, which means they have plenty of time left. A fair amount of them have a yellow-orangish tinge to their auras, which tends to mean a car crash or some other tragedy. Anything that takes people before their time, as they say. The real fun is when the auras venture into the red end of the spectrum though. Now and again, I'll see someone who is a walking spotlight. Those are the ones who get murdered or killed themselves. It's such a rush to see them and know their time is numbered. With that in mind, I always get to class early, so I could scout out my classmates' fates. The first kid who walked in was radiating red. I chuckled to myself. Too damn bad, bro. But as people kept walking in, they all had the same intense glow, but I was too stunned to move. Our professor stepped in and locked the door. His aura a sickening shade of green. When my sister Betsy and I were kids, our family lived for a while in a charming old farmhouse. We loved exploring its dusty corners and climbing the apple tree in the backyard. But our favorite thing was a ghost. We called her Mother, because she seemed so kind and nurturing. Some mornings Betsy and I would wake up, and on each of our nightstands we'd find a cup that hadn't been there the night before. Mother had left them there, worried that we'd get thirsty during the night. She just wanted to take care of us. Among the house's original furnishings was an antique wooden chair, which we kept against the back wall of the living room. Whenever we were preoccupied watching TV or playing a game, Mother would inch that chair forward, across the room, toward us. Sometimes she'd manage to move it to the center of the room. We always felt sad putting it back against the wall. Mother just wanted to be near us. Years later, long after we'd moved out, I found an old newspaper article about the farmhouse's original occupants. She'd murdered her 2 children by giving them a cup of poisoned milk before bed. Then she changed herself. The article included the photo of the farmhouse's living room, with a woman's body hanging from a beam. Beneath her, knocked over, was that old wooden chair, placed exactly in the center of the room. In fall 2016, I moved into a really old house. It was built in the 1880s. My friend had lived in it right before I moved in, and he claimed that it was haunted. But I didn't really believe him, because he was a bit of an odd guy. Anyways, the layout of the house was weird. You walked in the door and were in a living room type space, and then you kept walking, and past that was the kitchen. Only door inside the apartment was to the bathroom, and one that led to the basement. I was a little comfortable because I hadn't lived by myself in a long time, and was just feeling lonely and on edge. I stayed up late and then eventually fell asleep, but I woke up again around 2 in the morning. What woke me up was what sounded like a group of drummers were drumming on every flat surface of the living room. It went on for a while, and I was completely terrified. It was just a cacophony of sound. After about 2 or 3 minutes, I finally gathered up the balls to get up and check on it. And as soon as I passed the threshold to the living room, it just stopped. Nothing happened the rest of the night. A couple days later, a friend of mine was about to leave. We're standing by the front door next to my bookshelf, and I told him about how I was having trouble sleeping, and the story of the first night. As I was saying this, a book threw itself off the bookshelf, and on the floor 2 feet away. It had to fly past the dresser. The shelf was perched and landed between 2 of us. He just gave me a creeped out look and said he had to go. I don't blame him. Eventually, I asked the guy in the other half, as he had lived there for 8 years. He told me that no one stayed longer than a year, and they all reported the same shit. He said nothing ever happened on the side. Doesn't make sense, but there it is. It was May, in Tennessee. I was in my living room watching TV, and I heard a small knocking coming from the basement. So I walked down to investigate all over the basement to find nothing. I walked back upstairs to the living room and continued watching. About 5 minutes later, I heard a loud crash from the basement, and what sounded like a door opening. At this point, I was pretty worried. I started to make my way down the stairs, and as I went down, I thought maybe my brother was home without me knowing it. So I called his name. Nothing. I called again. Nothing. So I kept moving down the stairs, only to find that there were desks opened, boxes opened, and a few plastic bins and containers all knocked down and tipped over, with footprints leading out the door. Called my parents, and when they came, my mom called the police while my dad followed them. According to him, they went over my fence and to the road behind my house where they stopped. My guess is he was picked up. Terrifying. Maybe it's a ghost. I was home alone in Tennessee when it was like 9 or 10. Phone rings. Voice on the other end asks for David. I tell them sorry, wrong number. As a weird but relevant aside, we got constant wrong numbers when I was a kid, because our home phone line was 1 digit of from HR block. So I had developed a source of standard cadence to wrong number calls. It almost always went HR block, wrong number. So I'm on the line, waiting for him to say sorry. Instead, he starts yelling that he needs to speak to David. He knows David is there. I tell him I have 2 Uncle Davids, but neither are there. The guy starts cursing and ranting in what, in hindsight, was clear driven by myth. So I'm pretty spooked. And then he starts describing my house. He starts telling me which is white with brick pillars on the green porch, red doors, and with a white dog in the backyard. He concluded the calls, "We didn't know you're lying, and I'm gonna come to you." In the next 30 seconds, I rushed to get a knife in the kitchen. call my mom, and look out the front of my house. Then there's a banging at the door. I screamed at the pitch I didn't realize I could, and I ran into the bathroom, only locking door, and stayed there until my mom got home. When I heard the garage door open and my mom called out for me, I started sobbing and ran out to her, knife in hand. When I got older, I found out from my mom that the Uncle David the guy was looking for was a pretty bad drug addict for years, and that's why I hardly ever saw him. He probably gave someone he owed money to a bad address, or maybe a number. I was in my room, which is right above our kitchen, watching TV. I had already shut all the lights off downstairs because I was eventually going to fall asleep and didn't want to get yelled at for leaving the lights on. So I'm laying in my bed with the family dog laying next to me, when I heard cabinet doors open and shut. It wasn't like they all opened at once and then shut, but more like one after another for a few seconds. I freeze and look at the dog, who at this point was an old lady, who perked up and looked at me. I peeked out my window that overlooks our driveway and didn't see anything. Now I didn't think anyone was in the house. The dog gets up and starts moving towards the stairs. I grab my softball and cell phone and follow her downstairs. As we come downstairs, I notice the lights are on in the kitchen, and I called 911 because I know I shut the lights off prior to going upstairs. When we get in the kitchen, that's when I noticed that the door was still locked, so I thought whatever did this was still in the house. So I ran upstairs to my parents' closet, and I called my parents and told them what's up. They came home and didn't find any more or any trace of anyone being in the house. We still don't know why the light was on and off, but we had some paranormal, so we chalked it up to the household ghost. On Monday, I came up with the perfect plan. No one even knew we were friends. On Tuesday, he stole a gun from his dad. On Thursday, while the entire school was in the gym, we waited just outside the doors. I was to use the gun on whoever walked out first. Then he would take the gun and go into the gym blasting. I walked up to Mr. Quinn, the guidance counselor, and shot him in the face 2 times. He fell back into the gym, dead. The shots were deafening. We heard screams in the auditorium. One could not see us yet. I handed him the gun and whispered, "Your turn." He ran into the gym and started firing. I followed a moment after. He hadn't hit anyone yet. Kids were scrambling and hiding. It was mayhem. I ran up behind him and tackled him. We struggled. I wrenched the gun out of his hands, turned it on him, and killed him. I closed his mouth forever. On Friday, I was anointed a hero. It was indeed the perfect plan. It was 1 a.m., and Guy Helverson sat in his dark living room. He hadn't moved for over an hour. The accident earlier that evening kept playing over and over in his mind. The light turned red, but he was in a hurry and accelerated. An orange blare came from his right, and in a split second there was a violent jolt. Then the bicyclist rolled across his hood and fell out of sight. Horns bled angrily, and he panicked, stepping on the gas and screeching away from the chaos into the darkness, shaken and keeping an eye on his rear view mirror. "Why did you run? You idiot!" He'd never committed a crime before this, and punished himself by imagining years in jail. His career gone, his family gone, his future gone. Why not just go to the police right now? He can afford a lawyer. Then someone tapped on the front door, and his world suddenly crumbled away beneath him. They found me. There was nothing he could do but answer it. Running would only make matters worse. His body trembling, he got up, went to the door, and opened it. A police officer stood on the porch light. "Mr. Helverson?" asked the grim officer. He let out a defeated sigh. Yes, I'm sorry, but I'm afraid I have some bad news. Your son's bike was struck by a hit-and-run driver. He died at the scene. I'm very sorry for your loss. Sign here, please." The doctor hung the device around his neck. Mr. Weatherby, all of your tests has come back negative, and my examination shows nothing abnormal. Adam knew what was coming next. I'm not crazy, doctor. I'm sorry, but there is no physical reason for why you lose control of your hand. A psychologist can help you. I don't need therapy. I need answers. They seem to have a life all their own. I can't hold a job. I'm under investigation for assault. I almost killed my neighbor. I'll try anything at this point. After 2 weeks on a new medication, Adam saw no progress and grew increasingly depressed. He was convinced that despite what the doctor said, it was not a psychological problem. That night, a frustrated and angry Adam sat in a chair and drank bourbon, drunk and hopeless. He stumbled to the garage and started the table saw, then slowly lowered his wrists toward the screaming blade. Detective Armstrong entered the garage, where uniformed officers stood over the blood-soaked body. "So, what do we get?" he asked, taking in a blood-splattered scene. "This is a weird one, detective." "How so?" "Take a look at the body. He apparently chopped off his hands with the table saw and bled to death." Armstrong knelt. And we can't find his hands anywhere." I don't know why I looked up, but when I did, I saw him there. He stood against my window, his forehead rested against the glass, and his eyes were still in light, and he smiled a lipstick red, cartoonish grin, and he just stood there in the window. My wife was upstairs, sleeping. My son was in his crib, and I couldn't move. I froze and watched him looking past me through the glass. "No, please no." His smile never moved, but he put a hand up and slid it down the glass, watching me with matted hair and a yellow skin through the window. I couldn't do anything. I just stayed there, frozen, feet still in the bushes I was proning, looking into my home. He stood against my window. This is what I do every night. He's my guest. People started falling from the sky by the close of the decade. They were never dressed, always naked, always a petrifying grin on their faces. It had been just a few at first, but then hundreds and thousands would fall at a time, destroying cars and homes, and blocking off highways. Strange discoveries were made upon research. They were human but lacked any blood or even a heart. No one could explain the hideous grins they had, or even where they came from. It was a woman who made the latest and most disturbing discovery. She recognized one of the fallen bodies as a long-dead relative, one who died back when she was a teenager. Then more and more identifications were made. Soon people were picking out their long, dead loved ones amongst the video feeds. No one could explain why they were coming back, falling from the sky. Even more distressing, after disposing of the bodies, it wouldn't be long until the same body came plummeting from the sky, again and again. You couldn't get rid of them, no matter what. People were getting killed by the higher volume of the falling bodies, and soon after burial, they too began to fall. My mother was killed when a body landed on her car, crushing her. The next week, the news reported on a body that had gotten lodged in an airplane windshield. I saw my mother's grinning face, the happiest I'd ever seen her. They say when hell is full of people, the dead shall walk the earth. "Where are you?" I screamed, panicked. I ran through the abandoned farm. I can't find her. Not in the old house. Not in the bar. My heart racing. As I scanned the area, I ran into a mound of dirt and trip, sprawling to the ground. Getting up. It hits me. Abandoned farm. I tripped over freshly tilled earth. Crouching down, I start frantically cloning with my hands. Scooping handfuls of dirt, I hit something hard. It was wood. "Are you in there?" I cry, pressing my ear to the wood. I hear muffled cries. I start digging again, but realize it's taking too long. Looking around, I see a garden shed. I sprint to it, ripping the door open. I see a shovel, still caked in dirt, probably the same one that bastard buried her with. I grabbed it, running back. I started digging with purpose. Soon the wooden box is exposed. I toss the shovel and rip open the crate. She stares back at me, eyes wide, bound, gagged, but alive. I sigh with relief. Thank God. I reach into my bag, pulling out my rag and chloroform. I crouch down, placing it over her face. She struggles and faints. I toss her over my shoulder. Hell, my brother says as I walk back to the truck with a smirk. You found her? Yep, he almost hit me though. Alright, my turn. Where did you put her? I gesture to the creek area. Somewhere over there. Drowning's an issue though. Jerk? He says, running off. I smile, watching him go. I love adult hide and seek. Look, I'll be the first to admit I'm a complete bastard. I'm also lazy. I'm only here to find the idiot. There's almost an idiot. This support group is pretty typical. We connected online, decided on a quiet place. Jerome takes the lead, pouring everyone a cup of tea as he starts talking. I'm Jerome. You can drink your tea, but only after explaining why you are here. I'll start. He tells us he's never been loved. I can see why. The guy's ugly as sin. He sips his tea while the mousy chick speaks next. Mew, she says. Short and sweet. No blubbering. Gotta admire Mew. She's probably not the idiot. Next to talk are a legless veteran, a broken businessman, a needle track junkie, and a diseased old crone. Then it's my turn. I'm an ass. Everyone hates me. I take a loud, annoying slurp of oolong as the fat kid with the black eye goes next, telling his boring fat kid sub-story. Afterward, we're all sitting quietly when Jerome keels over. Then Mew's eye roll back and she slumps forward. The fat kid said, I thought this was a suicide support group. Found the idiot. It is, I say, spitting out my mouthful of tea. They support it. No one wants to die alone, kid. Oh, how goes white he turns, looking into his cup. I love it. I never have to lift a finger. Told you I'm a lazy bastard. I stumbled upon the old house while driving through the countryside in state of Georgia. It was hidden behind an overgrown hedge, its windows boarded up and the paint on the door peeling away. I couldn't resist the temptation to explore it, so I parked my car and made my way inside. The interior was darker than I anticipated, the only light coming from a small slit in the boarded up window. As I walked through the rooms, I noticed that the house was abandoned for years, covered in cobwebs and dust. The air was thick with the musty smell of neglect. I made my way to the back of the house, where I found a staircase leading to the second floor. The steps were old and creaky, and I was hesitant to venture up, but my curiosity got the best of me. So I climbed the stairs, one by one, until I reached the top. The hallway was lined with doors, and I felt a chill run down my spine as I approached the first one. I opened it, and the room was empty, save for a single piece of furniture, a rocking chair that was eerily moving on its own. I tried to steady my breathing as I moved to the next door. I saw a room that was frozen in time. There were toys scattered on the floor, and a small bed with a teddy bear lying on it. It was as if the child who lived here simply vanished into thin air. I moved on to the next room, and it was then that I heard the first strange noise. It sounded like footsteps, but there was no one else in the house. My heart was pounding as I quickly moved to the next door, hoping to find a way out. But as I opened the door, I was met with a sight that made my blood run cold. The room was filled with dolls, all staring at me with black, lifeless eyes. They seemed to be alive, moving their heads and arms as if they were beckoning me closer. I tried to run back down the stairs, but the door slammed shut behind me, trapping me in the haunted house. And that's when I felt a cold hand on my shoulder and a voice whispering in my ear, "You're never leaving." I never believed in ghosts until I moved into the old house in state of Georgia. The realtor had warned me that the house had a history, but I brushed it off as just a sales tactic. But as soon as I stepped inside, I could feel that there was something off about the place. At first, it was just things. The creaking of the floorboards at night, the flickering of the lights, and the occasional feeling of being watched. But then, things started to get more intense. Objects would move on their own, and I could hear faint whispers in the dead of night. I tried to ignore it all, telling myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But then, one night, I woke up to find a figure standing at the end of my bed. It was tall and shadowy, with glowing red eyes that seemed to stare straight into my soul. I screamed and ran out of the room, but the figure followed me, its eerie laughter echoing through the halls. I tried to leave the house, but the front door wouldn't budge. I made my way up to the attic, hoping to find a way out through the windows, but what I found up there was far worse than anything I could have imagined. The walls were covered in strange symbols. As I tried to make sense of it all, I heard a voice whispering in my ear, telling me to join them. I turned around to find a group of ghostly figures surrounding me. I knew then that there was no way out. The house had claimed me, and I was doomed to spend eternity trapped within its walls. And as I felt their cold, bony hands closing in around me, I knew I wasn't alone. The old house on Cherry Street had claimed many victims before, and it would continue to do so for as long as it stood. As a real estate agent, I was always on the lookout for the perfect home for my clients in state of Georgia, but there was one particular house that always caught my attention. An old abandoned mansion on the outskirts of town. It had been on the market for years, but no one ever seemed interested in. One day, I decided to take a closer look. As I approached the front door, I couldn't help and feel a sense of unease. The paint was peeling, and the windows were boarded up, and the lawn was overgrown with weeds, but something about the house drew me in. As I walked through the foyer, I felt a chill run down my spine. The air was musty and stale. The only sound was the creaking of the floorboards beneath my feet. I made my way through the rooms, each one seemingly emptier than the last. But as I entered the master bedroom, I felt a sudden change in the atmosphere. The room was still empty, but it felt as though someone or something was watching me. I turned to leave, but the door wouldn't budge. I tried to push it open with all my strength, but it was as though I was pushing against a solid wall. I heard a faint whisper. At first, I couldn't make out the words, but as the voice grew louder, I realized it was coming from the walls, and it was talking to me. I tried to run, but the hallway seemed to stretch on endlessly. The walls were closing in on me. I could hear screams coming from the other rooms, but it was powerless to help. Just as I thought it was the end, the house released me from its grasp. I stumbled out onto the front lawn, gasping for air. As I looked back at the mansion, it seemed to shrink and wither away before my eyes. I never went back to that house again. I could still feel its presence in my dreams. I could hear the walls begging me to come back. I would ride my bike around my neighborhood, admiring the different colors and styles of the houses. But there was one house that always stood out to me, the old mansion at the end of the block. It was a beautiful structure, but something about it gave me chills every time I passed by. One summer day, I was walking home when I noticed something strange about the mansion. The windows were all boarded up, and the once green lawn was now an overgrown mess. I couldn't help but feel a creepy vibe coming from the house. As the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the mansion. I talked to some of my neighbors, but no one seemed to know why the house had been abandoned. I was sitting in my room reading when I heard a strange noise outside. I peeked out my window and saw a shadowy figure moving around in the yard of the mansion. I couldn't make out any details, but I knew it wasn't a person or an animal. My curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to investigate. I snuck out of my house and made my way to the mansion. As I got closer, I saw the front door was slightly ajar. I hesitated for a moment, but then pushed the door open and stepped inside. The first thing I noticed was the musty smell, and cobwebs covered every surface. I cautiously made my way through the rooms, feeling like I was in a haunted house. As I entered one of the bedrooms, I saw a figure sitting on the edge of the bed, but her face was hidden in the shadows. I turned to leave, but something grabbed me from behind. I spun around, but there was no one there, and I heard a faint whispering coming from all around me. I ran from the mansion as fast as I could, but I knew I wasn't alone. The feeling of being watched stayed with me for weeks, and I couldn't shake it, no matter how hard I tried. One day, I saw a news article about the mansion. It turns out a woman had been murdered there years ago, and her killer had never been caught. The mansion had been abandoned ever since. The mystery of the mansion was finally solved, but the memory of that night stayed with me forever. There was a house in a small neighborhood in Maryland that went overboard with Halloween decorations every year. Whenever the crisp fall air rolled in, the entire town would look forward to the unveiling of the new display. But no one ever really talked to the person who did the actual decorating. He was a longer. People only knew him for his Halloween spirit, and his decorations become grander and more lifelike every year. The newest one was a Vlad the Impaler theme. Hyper-realistic, bloodied mannequins were pierced through the wooden stake and left to the crows in a gruesome display. It was the ultimate work of horror, so much so that it caused quite the controversy in the town. While some loved it, many of the local parents wanted it taken down for their children's sake. So a town official made the trip to the house soon after the unveiling to discuss the matter with the man who lived there. She knocked on the front door. No answer. Knocked. Nothing at all. She rang the doorbell. Nothing still. It was then that the official realized there was a putrid smell in the yard, an unusual amount of bongs buzzing around for this time of year. She wandered over to one of the mannequins to get a closer look at the incredible craftsmanship. The smell got worse. She gagged and had to put her hand over her mouth. Her eyes went wide. The official put her trembling finger up to the doll and felt the soft, smooth, cold touch of human skin. After that, no one was able to locate the man who'd once lived there. Now, it's truly a haunted house. Daisy Clark had been in a coma for over a month when the doctor declared her dead. She was buried on a cold summer day in a small cemetery about a mile from her home. May she always rest in peace, her husband said, but it wasn't how it turned out. Late that night, a grave robber, armed with a shovel and a flashlight, began to dig her up. As the earth was still loose, he quickly reached the coffin and opened it. His hunch was right. Daisy had been buried wearing 2 rings, a diamond wedding ring and studded with a brilliant ruby. The thief knelt down and reached inside the coffin to take the rings, but they were completely stuck on Daisy's fingers. He decided that the only way to get them was to cut off her fingers and begin to saw the flesh. It began to bleed. Suddenly, she sat up, terrified. The thief scrambled to his feet, accidentally knocking his flashlight, which went out. In the dark, he could hear Daisy emerge from the grave. The thief stood frozen, clutching the knife in his hand. Daisy covered herself with her shroud and asked, "Who are you?" Hearing the corpse speak, the grave robber ran. Daisy shrugged and kept walking, not bothering to look back. Seized by fear and confusion, the thief fled in wrong direction and fell headfirst into the open grave onto his own knife. As Daisy walked home, the thief bled to death. A man named Backwell came to a city on a business trip. He stayed at a large house some friends owned in the outskirts of the city. That night, they had a pleasant evening chatting and reminding the past. But when Backwell went to bed, he began to toss and turn and was unable to sleep. At one point during the night, he heard a car pull into the driveway. He went to the window to see who might be arriving at such a late hour. In the moonlight, he saw a black hearse full of people. The driver looked up at him. When he saw his face, he shuddered. The driver called to him, "There's room for one more." He then waited a minute or two before driving off. In the morning, Backwell told his friends what had happened before. "You were dreaming," they said. He replied, "But it didn't seem like a dream." After breakfast, he left for town and spent the day in the offices of one of the new high-rise buildings in the city. Late in the afternoon, he was ready to go back into the house and was waiting for the elevator to take him down to the ground floor. But when it stopped at his floor, it was very full. One of the people inside looked at him and said, "There's room for one more." It was the driver of the hearse. "No, thanks. I'll wait for the next, thank you," Blackwell said. The doors closed, and the elevator began to descend. Moments later, there was a terrible shouts, crash, and screams could be heard. The elevator had collapsed. All the people inside were killed. A 7-year-old girl was left with her grandmother in her small apartment while her parents went to the movies. Grandmother and granddaughter had dinner together and chatted for a while. At 10 o'clock, the grandmother picked up her sewing, and the girl turned on the TV. They were sitting companionably together when the grandmother got a terrible thirst and asked her granddaughter to bring her a glass of water. "It's too dark," said the girl. "Don't be scared. Follow the corridor. There's a switch right next to the bathroom door." The girl got up and felt her way along the wall of the corridor, groping for the switch. As she reached the bathroom, she stopped and fell around, only to come into the contact with a bony hand who tried to drag her into the bathroom. The girl managed to pull away and ran, screaming and crying, back to her grandmother. After the incident, the girl needed psychological treatment. Several teenage boys went for a sleepover at a friend's house. When they turned out the lights, they started talking about an old man who had just been buried in a nearby cemetery. It was said that he had been buried alive and could be heard scratching at the coffin, trying to get out. One of the boys scoffed at the idea, so the others dared him to go visit the grave right there and then. As proof that he had actually gone, he was to drive a wooden stake in the earth of the grave. The boy left, and his friends lay waiting for him to return. But the hours went by, and their friends failed to materialize. They lay awake, increasingly terrified. Morning came, and the boy still hadn't appeared. So when the parents came back, they all went down to the cemetery. There they found the boy lying on the grave, dead. When he had bent down to drive the stake into the ground, struggling to get up, he thought the buried man had grabbed him. It was concluded that he died of fright. I used to often spend my summers bouldering with my friends by a large forest that was about an hour and a half away from where I used to live. We used to spend some of the nights camping out there just to save some travel costs and time. I think this was roughly like third time we're out there camping. My friend had left all her climbing gear and her rucksack just outside her tent, or we think she did. The next morning we found her boots, a few clothes, and all her chalk powder had disappeared. We figured it could have been feasible that she misplaced it. Although we're quite sure they were next to her tent, we didn't really want to believe that they were stolen. Anyway, we didn't read too much into this, just said to ourselves that perhaps she had left it by boulders and some animal took an interest to it. I know it sounds stupid. Fast forward a year. We're at the same spot as usual, sitting by the tents and chilling after having some food. Mind you, it's blackout, and only the camp area is lit by the fire. I go somewhere a bit out of sight for Slash, and what do I see? A dude in a full of ghillie suit laying on his stomach, looking right towards our campsite. I kinda stood there frozen as the stood clocks that I've seen him, and he just bolted out of there. I don't know whether the event to the year prior was related to the Gili guy, but this definitely has stuck to all of us. We haven't been back there since, which is damn shame. My cousins live in North Dakota, and I spent the winter break their freshman year in college. We were at their friend's house one night, drinking in her basement with some other boys. And it was really late, like 2 a.m. I was falling asleep, so I decided to walk home. They live in a desolate area with lots of snow, and it gets really cold. But the houses weren't too far apart, and when the moon is out, it seems light out. The path we always take is behind the house, through some wooded areas, the Morpan Lane, and as I was shuffling home through snow with my head down, I look up and to the left, my 10 o'clock, and like 75 yards away is another figure walking in the opposite direction. I saw him split second before he saw me, and when he did, he kinda jerked his arms and shoulders up a little, obviously startled from the sight of me, as I was with him. I laughed out loud for some reason, just from the shock or something, and gave him a little wave like, "Oh, you startled me? Sorry," kinda thing. He just stood there and stared at me. I thought he was going to say something for a second, so I was stopped too, just looking at him. He had a full face, ski mask on, and I could tell it was a dude, cause he was really tall, but he didn't say anything. So for what felt like forever, it's just me and some stranger in a ski mask looking at each other in the desolate woods, in the middle of winter, at 2 a.m. A huge chill went down my spine, and a voice said, "You need to get the fuck out of here, right now." I turned and started walking as fast as I could. I have never been that scared in my life. I was drunk, stoned, and very paranoid. I imagined me walking home from the opposite perspective, and the man is running up from behind with an axe. So I screamed and started sprinting as fast as I could all the way home, thinking that this guy could easily follow my tracks in the snow, and I'm gonna get murdered. Luckily I didn't, but I don't think I'll see them again anytime soon. A trail I liked backpacking in an isolated area was the setting for this odd encounter. The trail has a short section that goes over someone's cabin property and continues on the other side of his yard. It's marked with an orange blaze so you can see where to go. It's an empty cabin. I always do some peering inside since it's in pretty secluded spot, probably 4 or 5 miles from a major road. One time I was hiking and there's a large dude grilling outside with about 15 Bud Light cans on the ground. I remember him saying, "Keep it moving, no food here," which I thought was funny since I didn't say anything about needing food. Fast forward the following year, and I decided to take my sister, my wife, and her best friend on a trip that takes us through this very spot. As we are walking up on it, I see the dude is there again, which is odd, since I've hiked the trail 100 times, and this is only twice I've seen him. He is grilling again, beer cans everywhere. I see him start to give the keep it moving signal until he says who I am with. Now I'm nervous all of a sudden. He asks to stay for dinner. I tell him no, we're good, just trying to enjoy the trail away from the comforts of home. He gets pushy about this, and I firmly say no thanks, and we're just passing through. I heard the dude mumble to himself as we continue past his house. This is where things get weird. There's a prominent camping spot not far from the section of trail, and it's late in my head. I want to keep going. The consensus is everyone is pretty tired, so we set up camp. I'm nervous the whole time, thinking this dude knows there are women camping in tents near his cabin. I never get nervous around folk I see on the trail, because everyone is usually very nice and wonderful to talk. This guy felt love to me though. Fast forward to the middle of the night, and sure enough I hear someone on the trail outside the tent. But I hear the dude mumbling to himself and I panic. I hear him now in the camp. He is going through our shed and is pissed drunk. Okay, think. I realize I have a blowhorn on my pack I use on the trail to scare animals off should they encounter any. So I unzip the tent slowly and roll out. Dude is fumbling around because it's the middle of darkness in the middle of nowhere. Everyone starts screaming. The dude shit his pants and starts bumbling the fuck out of there. Everyone is shaken up at this point. We pack up and night hike out there. Worst experience I've ever had. My buddies and I would hit up the desert at night and go for reeling on the trails. This one night we had stopped for break and this guy rolls up on us. He asks us if he can join us, and we say sure. We continue riding and it was second to last, with him being the last one. I was familiar with the trails, so I kept looking back, checking in on him, not knowing how familiar he was or experienced rider he was. As we're approaching the hill that overlooks most of the area, I look back and he's gone. I flag my buddies down and we go back to look for him. Nothing. We go up the hill, listen for his bike or look for his light. It was pitch black and not a sound. From the hill, I'm sure you could see for a few miles, but there was no trace of him. We looked for him or his bike till about 2 a.m. and we couldn't find him. It still kinda bugs me that the guy vanished like that. I hope nothing happened to that man. A lot of the riding desert areas have become populated by now. I was scared out of my minds. None of us had talked to this guy. He just rolled up on us. We asked him if he wanted to ride with us, and he just nodded yes. We watched the news for weeks after, if there was a body found or something, and nothing. There was nothing. It was a drug runner, being that it was in a border town. I don't know who he was. A few years back, I rented an apartment from a friend of mine. He had recently bought it and had it renovated. He put it up for sale but couldn't find a buyer, so I offered to rent it in the meantime. After moving in, I realized there was something wrong with the lady next door. She was about 45, but looked much older. She would sit up all night, listening to the radio shows and talking loudly to someone. It got to the point where I couldn't sleep, so I went over and asked her to keep it down. She opened her door, and I got a quick peek inside. Her walls all had crosses painted on them in different colors, and words like angels scribbled everywhere. The windows were painted black, letting no light in at all. It was damp, yellow-stained, 50-year-old carpets. Dog shit and roaches everywhere. No dog though. I asked her to please keep it down. She just looked at me and shut the door. Then she turned up the radio even louder. The next night, I had my friends staying over. I wake up in the middle of the night and see a shadow of a person next to the bed looking at us. The shadow starts talking. It's my neighbor, and she's holding something in her hand. She broke in during the night, and who knows how long she stood there. "You should lock your door at night," she says and walks out. The next morning, I hear someone making strange noises below my bedroom window. It's my neighbor talking to herself in tongues. She has a plastic bag in her hand with her rotten dog inside. It's hot as hell outside, and I can smell it from the bag. At this point, I'm scared shitless. I go upstairs and knock on the person's door and ask what the hell is going on. He's scared too. She broke into his apartment one evening while he was watching TV with his kids, only to find her behind the couch, staring at him, holding a power drill. Now I know what was in her hand. I'm basically pooping myself. I called the cops, and they knew all about her. Apparently, she's psychic, and she hasn't taken her meds, but they can't force her or enter apartment without her permission, because she owns it. The only thing they can do is get her when she goes outside. I stayed up for the next 2 days waiting for her to run out of cigarettes. When I hear her at 2 a.m. to go across the road, I call the cops. They have 2 cars and special went over in less than 2 minutes. I threw her in the van and drive off to some institution. It's like she was never there. I never see her again. Still have nightmares about her. I was out in the woods playing with my dog. I'm an only child, and both of my parents were out of town, when I kept feeling something hit my elbow. I'd go to throw Meg's ball, assuming it was just me bumping it in trees. I ignored it. After 4 times, I thought I'll just go home. Walking back, I felt uneasy, but I knew I was just freaking myself out. About an hour, Max and I are at home on the couch, when the garage door opens, and he starts barking. I hop up to go let in my mom or dad, even though they were home early. I saw the door was shut and no one was in the garage, quieting Max down. I opened the door and called out for my dad. Nothing, no response at all. I go out to check the door, and it's locked. Weird, but well, Max heard it too, so at least I know I'm not crazy. About minutes later, I hear the door open again, and this time Max growling like crazy. I quiet him down again and just assume it's a wind or something, even though by this point my heart is racing. I hear footsteps come up the stairs and think Dad is home right now, and hop up and run to the door. I peep through the hole. There's no one on the other side of the door. Terrified, I go hide on the couch with all the lights on. Max is growling. I start to feel better, even though I'm still terrified. Then I heard the door handle jiggle again. This time it was Max. He needed to go outside, and the only way outside is through the garage. I sprinted with him to the kennel. I decided to ask this question to make myself feel better. As I think about what to ask, my eyes are drawn to the heavy oak door on the kennel. It was always open. It was too heavy for me to move. I said, "Okay, ghost, if you're real, you'll shut this heavy door." Nothing. A minute goes by. Nothing. And then from behind me, I hear a click. It was just the wind. It wasn't really windy, but it was the wind. I just was being scared. The door was now wide open, so we booked it back into the house, locking every door in the house. I would hear the footsteps on the stairs, and the door handle jiggle every few minutes. Until 11 p.m., my dad walks in and yells at me for the lights. I never told him or my mom about it. Until about 4 months later, when my dad came in, he looked shaken, and I asked him what was wrong. He said he aimed at 2 deer, but missed both, cause it felt as if something was hitting his elbow. That's when I told him everything. There's a single set of stairs that lead up to it. Once on the landing, it's a T-shape with an office to the left, my bedroom to the right, and straight ahead is a bathroom with a shower. Anyway, one night, I'm taking a shower before I head to sleep. The glass panels on my shower are that like convex glass that blur everything. So everything was blurred and unclear. I glanced at the door, and I see some kind of hand-like figure. Now, it was pitch black. So right there, it freaked me out. What freaked me out more was how the hand seemed to come through the door, or at least an angle where whomever the hand belonged to would be visible. All it did was hit the lights. That's it. No noise, no attack or anything. It just turned off the fucking lights. So there I am, I just witnessed a phantom hand, and now I'm in my shower and it's pitch fucking black. I've never been so chilled to the bone before. Something about being in the darkness of the night just reduced me to the most primal state of pure fear. I get myself to leave the shower and hit the lights. The relief that came over me was immense. I've never been able to explain it. The stairs up to the landing are old and creak like hell, so I would have heard someone come and go down. No one was in my room or the office. Weirder still, nothing like it has happened since.